Marhaba, I'm Christopher Hibma, and this is Maharat, Producing in Unproductive Times by Atijahad Independent Culture, a series created for artists in the Arab region that celebrates creative producers and the skills it takes to make things happen. This week we will explore concepts in co-production and why it's an important model in our field with two American producers who have previously partnered to present work from the Arab region here in the US, Joseph Haj and Philip Bither. In our last episode, we talked about financial fundamentals to consider as you produce your project. But what do you do if, as you build your budget, you realize that you don't have the capacity or expertise to bring the piece to life on your own? This is where co-producing comes in. Co-producing is when two or more partners enter into a collaboration to support the creation and distribution of a production. How might you identify co-producers? How might you define success? How might power dynamics play a role in these partnerships? Hopefully, you will leave this episode knowing the answers to some of these questions. Due to the amount of resources it takes to develop, produce, and tour a show, the vast majority of productions involve some kind of co-production. There are many advantages to producing with multiple partners. Co-producing can help you overcome scarce production opportunities. It can also allow you to broaden your network and expand your partnerships. And if you're looking to present your work internationally, co-producers can also allow for travel opportunities and added mobility. A producing partner can mean a variety of things. It might mean an artist, similar to yourself, who is dedicated to producing your work. It might mean an organization with an infrastructure to offer direct financial support as well as provide space and producing expertise. It can also mean an institution that is not a performance venue, like a cultural foundation, an NGO, or an individual donor. More often than not, co-productions have elements of all three. So, how do you identify co-producers? That's an important question to answer because when you know your producers well and have worked with them in the past, the risks are much smaller. It's important that you have a clear artistic vision and that you articulate your vision to your co-producer when developing your partnership. Finding a producing partner whose values and goals align with your own is essential. You have to genuinely like them. It's important to also understand how power dynamics can emerge in these partnerships. Most relationships between large organizations and individual artists begin with an offer of rehearsal space, then maybe fundraising support, and possibly then further opportunities for production or staging. Make sure that you are creating meaningful relationships in which everyone brings their truest selves to the table. Be wary of paternalistic relationships and make sure your co-producers do not engage with you as if they're doing you a favor. Your relationship may not be equal across the board, but it must always be reciprocal. As producers, it's important that you share values. This includes your artistic values as well as your mutual agreement about the creative process. When differences emerge, make sure to maintain clear communication that allows everyone to negotiate and find solutions that satisfy the collective. Remember, grace and respect are key. Here are some organizing principles that I suggest for a robust co-producing relationship. Start small. Ideally, start your own co-producing journey with a manageable project and fewer partners. Build your network. Aim to meet new artists and producers, both locally and internationally, through strategic introductions. Find an experienced partner. You may wish to partner with a more experienced producer for your first project who can walk in tandem with you as a skillful guide. Acknowledge cultural differences and build cultural literacy. Do not take for granted things that may be culturally or geographically specific, and understand that miscommunications may emerge due to misunderstanding. Remember to address language barriers and the need for linguistic support. If your collaborators are working in a different country, understand that cultural expectations of the work may be different. Constantly use your judgment. Navigate each co-producer's needs to ensure both are satisfied. Know exactly what your contributions are and be meticulous about executing them. Now let's get to my conversation with Joseph Haj, Artistic Director of the Guthrie Theater, where I started my career, and Philip Bither, Senior Curator of the Wooker Art Center. What were the concerns you had going? I know you've both had other co-producing relationships in your life, and that's I welcome any thoughts about that as well. But what about particularly presenting international work brought you two together, and how did that relationship flesh itself out?
Well, I was thrilled. About 6 months or a year, I think, before Joe moved here, I had a chance to visit him at Playmakers in Chapel Hill, and I was doing a little site visit for a foundation around a residency program that Joe was producing, and I don't remember if it was at that moment, but I did. Soon after, I think, when Joe took the job at the Guthrie, we sort of were in touch and said, we should try to do some things together. There's a long history with Guthrie, Wooker, all the way to the earliest days where they were sort of sister organizations, and I was thrilled by that. Of course, it's two very different kinds of institutions, but then a year or two, maybe, I mean, we kept in touch. I think the one thing I'd emphasize most to anyone is that so much of what we do and how we do it successfully is related to relationships, trust. And I feel lucky that when Joe arrived, we already knew and I think liked and trusted each other to a certain extent. And then, I went back and was remembering the Ali Chahor project that we, one of the first joint projects we did together. Joe had seen it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but at the Avignon Festival. I had heard of his name, but Joe mentioned, hey, this was a beautiful show, performance. If you ever have a chance to see it, this might be something interesting that we could do together. And then I was at the TBA Festival, a time-based arts festival in Portland, and they happened to have the only date in America of Ali's, Layla's death. And I was blown away by it and had a chance to meet him afterward, and Junaid, the dramaturg, and the one thing led to another. I went back to Joe and said, I love the work too. Thank you for giving me the heads up. Maybe there's some way we could do this together. And that grew into a 2-part global theater series between the Wooker and the Guthrie. I had recommended a work by Robert Lepage called 887. Joe saw the tape and had people see it, or I can't remember, Joe, if you saw it yourself. And then we did that one at the Wooker, which was ironic because that was maybe a little bit more traditionally narrative, even though it was very inventive. And we did Ali's work at the Guthrie, even though that was a bit more Wooker-esque and abstract and experimental in a certain way. And that was wonderful too, even though I think those choices were in part practical and in terms of timing, but it was wonderful to kind of blur our aesthetics in a certain way across town and across institutions and spaces. And the only other thing I'd say is when, we have tried to value, way back before I started the Wooker, this a big part of the Wooker's performing arts program has been about collaboration and co-presentation. And that's been in part because we didn't have a theater at all. We had a little lecture room, an auditorium until 2005 when we built the McGuire Theater at the Wooker. And so we kind of out of needed to work with as many as 15 different spaces and organizations in town to make things happen. So it became part of the DNA of like, how we should really collaborate because it's got its own inherent value when you can join forces, even though it's not always easy. But if organizations can work together, I think it just benefits the whole ecosystem and the community overall. And that I thought that a 2-part partnership went beautifully. I think we both brought different strengths to it. Joe's operation and the Guthrie's is 10 times bigger, 20 times bigger than my department of performing arts at the Wooker. So, but they were very generous, and we found our way together and brought different strengths. So
It's so interesting to note that a traditional theater, right, and a museum, a contemporary art museum, found a way to share common values, and even as you said, 2 very different scales of departments supporting. How did you? And Joe, you probably have a lot to say too, but like, how did you make sure that the partnership felt either reciprocal or equitable?
I mean, I think it's a great, great question. And I think, again, you know, as Philip points out, and for folks who are watching this, the Guthrie and the Wooker Art Center like literally shared the same building. Like you come in through the lobby, if you go left, you went to the Wooker. If you went right, you went to the Guthrie. I mean, they literally shared the same building. They were on the same footprint, on the same piece of land, you know, doing that work side by side for many years. So there's something sort of in the DNA that kind of made some sense. But I will say, and maybe to the point, you know, the scale is different, the model is different, the aesthetics are different. The Guthrie is a producing organization. We very rarely present. The Wooker, the inverse of that equation, right? So like in some ways, nothing makes sense. But what makes sense and what's crucial is I think you have to genuinely like the mind and the thinking of that other person in that partner organization. And you have to genuinely want your partner's success. You don't have to be the same. You don't have to be super matchy. You don't have to be the same size. You don't have to be the same scale. You don't have to share a brain. But you have to share a belief in the work that each are doing and the desire for one another's success. So that's what allowed for the creativity and the conversation around, even as we circled Leila's death and Lepage as pieces that artists and pieces that we wanted to make, the idea of like, wow, what if we put the thing that looks nothing like what a Guthrie audience expects in front of a Guthrie audience? And what if we put something that is less like what a Wooker audience expects and put that in the Wooker and kind of cross-pollinate our community and invite some folks into rooms they wouldn't. There are some folks at the Wooker who don't show up at the Wooker all the time by virtue of that partnership. There are folks who showed up at the Guthrie who hadn't crossed our threshold in a million years or ever until we were doing this in partnership with the Wooker. So in the end, and of course it's hard and it's lurching, and you have marketing departments that message in different ways, talk about work in different ways, work on different timelines and cadences. So a million logistic things that are frustrations or lurches along the way. But fundamentally, I felt that I adored Philip. I knew him for a long time before. I love the Wooker and everything that it does, even if it's not the work of the Guthrie. And the desire that we wanted one another's success in this, and our sureness that if we got it right, it would feel good to our respective organizations and communities. I think, you know, that kept us through the darker days, the stumbles, the things we can't get that artist, we're running out of money, why are we messaging it this way? Those things that happens along the way, I thought were all easily mitigated by the belief in one another, the shared belief in what it was we were trying to pursue.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and know more about how to approach potential co-producers. Perhaps another artist, a local theater, or an NGO. Catch my whole river conversation with Joseph and Philip at the link below. Subscribe and join us on our social channels, and maybe you'll find a co-producing match. In the next episode of Maharat, we'll discuss fundraising with Lebanese cultural leader Rima Mismar. Ma salama.